Well, hello everybody and welcome to the tutorial for keyframes and the graph editor. So I'm hoping that this tutorial will be a little bit of an overview on keyframes, and then we can get into a little bit more advanced keyframe manipulation, creating more dynamic movement in our motion design project, which is good because that makes your project more engaging and more interesting to watch. So let's go ahead and start by launching After Effects. Okay, so once you get After Effects launched, you are going to go ahead and want to do a new project. Now, if you're not sure if you are up to date on the most recent version of After Effects, you'd want to go ahead and go to your Adobe Cloud Manager and just make sure that you don't have an update for After Effects, which it looks like I do have an update, but that's okay. I have done fairly recent updates, but if it's been a while, you want to go ahead and make sure you're updated to the newest version. So in After Effects, we're going to go ahead and do a new project, and we are going to be brought into our interface here. So I have been going back and forth, I must tell you, and I'm not sure which is best. So I work in dark mode for all things, basically, and have for years, and I hadn't even been into the light mode version of the interface for a while. But here's what I'm concerned about sometimes is that the dark mode is a little bit too hard for you guys to see. But when I went in and switched it to light mode, everything was kind of on the lighter side. So I'm finding that what the interface lacks in terms of recording tutorials is contrast. But just in case you ever wanted to, change yours from light mode to dark mode or whatever, in case you don't know, you can go to settings and appearance, and you have darkest dark and light. This is the light mode. It seems like it would be easier to see, but we're working with keyframes today, and they had very little contrast on the timeline editor. So I'm going to go ahead and stay in dark, but I did want to show you how to change that in case you want to flip to dark or switch it to light or whatever, depending on what your settings were. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. So we're going to go ahead and start off by creating a new composition. I'm just going to call this circles. We're just going to be working with some simple shape layers for this. What I do want you to definitely do is have a width of 1920 by 1080 pixels. And then we're going to set this composition to 8 seconds, okay? That's all you need to do. So let's go ahead and create this composition. Now, we're going to go ahead and create a couple of layers here in just a moment, but let's say I want my canvas window just as a little bit of a refresh to fit to the space that I'm working in here. I can go down here. There's a whole control panel right here, and I'm going to go ahead and put it to fit, and it's going to automatically fit my canvas to my work area here. Now, if your work interface doesn't look right or what have you, I always work in the standard workspace, I believe it is. So if your interface is looking funny, you can always go to Window, Workspace, and then you can go to Reset Standard. Well, no, let's see. Yeah, mine's set to standard. So you can go ahead and click on, you should be able to get it back to something like, let me change it to effects, for example. Kind of changes the interface a little bit. But if you go to Window Workspace and click on Standard, it should get you to where how I'm working in After Effects anyways, and to enable you to follow along a little bit better. Okay, so we have our composition. Now, right now, our project is untitled. So let's go ahead and save our project. We want to get off to a good start and save our projects for, before we get started working, and then also save them along the way. So I'm just going to save this to my desktop. I'm going to call it keyframes. Go ahead and save that there. Perfect. Okay. So this should be an easy one. I'm not bringing any outside assets in for this tutorial. We're really just going to dig into keyframes and look at some new options to create more dynamic animation there. Hopefully that will be a really important skill to add to your toolbox for motion design. So let's go ahead and let's go to layer up here in the top menu. And I am actually going to go ahead and make my mouse larger so that it will be a little bit easier to see. Okay, hopefully that'll be a little easier to see. So it's bright pink and green, so hopefully that helps. All right, so we're gonna go to new and solid. And for this, I would pick something that's a little bit darker in value, but you can do whatever you want ultimately, it's all good. So I'm just going to pick like a darkish blue. And then there we go. Now I'm going to go ahead and lock this layer because I don't want this layer moving around or doing anything. It's just going to be the background of my composition. So next thing we're going to do is we are going to do a new shape layer. And you can really pick whatever shape you want. I'm going to go ahead and pick the ellipse tool, because I want my shapes to be circles. Now you can make a circle like so. You can just drag it around, but for what I'm doing, I need a perfect shape, a perfect ellipse. So if I hold my shift key down, you're gonna see that it keeps it in proportion like so. So I'm just gonna do that again. So what you're gonna do first is you're gonna go to layer, new shape layer, so that creates the layer for you to create your shape in. And then I'm going to hit the ellipse tool here up in my menu. I'm going to hold my shift key down. I'm going to go ahead and make an ellipse. Now there's a couple of things we need to do to this ellipse before we can really work with it in keyframes. The first thing I need to do is the center of this circle. Because I created a new shape layer, when I created the new shape layer, it automatically put the anchor point for the layer right here in the center of the composition. So we need to move the anchor point to the center of this circle. So what we're going to do is up in the menu next to your shape tool, you're going to find the pan anchor tool. The quick key for it is also Y. And I'm going to go ahead and highlight the layer here, and I'm going to take that and I'm going to drag it so that the center of the layer is the center of my shape right here. The other thing I want to do is I want to make this this shape a little bit more dynamic visually. So I'm going to change the fill. Right now it's just a plain white, but if I go up here, you're going to see your fill and stroke. Now if you don't see that, just make sure you click. See how if I click off, it disappears? If I go onto the shape layer and I highlight it, my fill and stroke are going to show up. So I'm going to click on the fill, and I have a couple of different options. I have nothing. I have a solid color. I have a linear gradient, and then it's hard to read that because my pointer's so big, and a radial gradient. So I'm going to go ahead and choose a linear gradient, and you're going to see that it defaulted to kind of a pink and coral color. That's because those were colors that I was using on another gradient in a past project. So I went ahead and said I want a gradient. Perfect. I'm going to hit OK. And then if I click on the fill color itself, it's going to give me options to edit the gradient. And I think I just want the gradient to be a little bit more dramatic in how it's changing. So do that, and then I'm going to make this coral color maybe a little bit brighter, a brighter orange or dark yellow or something. And you can, play around with this. If you've used a gradient in Illustrator or Photoshop, it's the same process. So if you want to add a gradient to your circle, go ahead. It will give it a little bit of visual depth. All right, so what I'm going to do is bring my circle over here to the top left of the screen. You all go ahead and do the same. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to duplicate this 2 times. So let's see, it looks like my anchor point fell away. So I'm going to go ahead and move that there. Okay. So anchor point is in the center of the sphere. So what I want to do is I'm going to go ahead and duplicate this layer 2 times. So to do that, it's very easy. So you can have the layer selected and then go to edit and duplicate. It's also Command or Control D. So I'm just going to highlight this layer and I'm going to hit Command D 2 times. And that gives me 2 more identical versions of this layer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pull. Now I still have my anchor point tool selected, so I need to switch back to my selection tool. And I'm just going to pull down the shape layers. And then I'm going to rename these layers down here because it can get really confusing pretty quickly. So I'm just going to use my eyeball tool and make sure they are the ones that I think they are. That's middle and that's top. Okay, cool. So what you can do is control or right click right on the shape layer name, and I'm just going to rename these top, middle, bottom so that I am choosing the right layer. It is, like I said, really helpful to have these named and organized when you're working on your project so that you're clicking on the right layer. It's once you get to a point where you have multiple layers, it can get really pretty complicated. So it's just like any other application, like if you have your layers, your assets named, it can just make things a little bit easier. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to apply keyframes in all 3 of these layers at the same time for position. So go ahead and select and shift select all 3 layers. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a quick key to have the position property pop up for all 3 of these. So go ahead with those layers highlighted, hit your P key for position. Make sure your scrubbing tool is at the beginning of the timeline. And what we're going to do is with the position brought up for all 3 of these, if all of your layers are still highlighted, if you just click on the time clock, you're going to see keyframes pop up for each one of these. And so they all have a position keyframe. Now, just to refresh, keyframes tell an asset where you want it to be at a particular time in the timeline. And well, I suppose the first property is usually position, but this can also be scale, opacity, and a number of other things, right? There's so many different things, but those are kind of your basics. Position, scale, rotation, opacity. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and bring the scrubbing tool down to 4 seconds, so halfway through. And with these all still selected, we're just going to click and drag these spheres towards the right side of the composition. One thing you can do if you want these to be perfectly horizontal is if you hold your shift key down, and you'll know this to be true of many of the Adobe applications, if you hold your shift key down, it will click in usually increments of 45 degrees or something to that effect. Sometimes it's just horizontal and vertical. But anyways, yeah, if you hold the shift key down, you'll see that it'll kind of snap them into perfect horizontal path. So we're going to do that. We're going to let go. So now we've got point A, all of our spheres then go to point B. And then what we want to do is have them return to the beginning at the end of the timeline. So what we're going to do, we could just drag them back, but an easy way to get a perfect keyframe for them to return exactly where they were is to copy and paste keyframes. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So if you click these first keyframes, you can click on these little keyframes like they're little buttons, and we're going to shift select all three of them. You can go ahead and go to edit and copy or Command C. Let's go down to the end of the timeline, and we're going to hit Command V or paste. You can go to edit, paste as well. And look at that. We have these keyframes copied from the beginning of the timeline. So over these 8 seconds, we should have a perfect sync in how these are moving. And this is perfect because what we're going to be doing is looking at different ways that keyframe manipulation can change the movement of something and make it more interesting for your viewer. Okay, so we're going to keep the top one how it is. We don't want to do anything to it. So I'm going to go ahead and toggle up the top layer here, and I'm going to lock it up because I don't want to accidentally apply anything to it that I'm not ready to apply to it or whatever. And so we're just going to be focusing on the middle one here. Now, a little bit of a refresh for some of you. Some of you might already be familiar with this, but for those of you that need a refresh or aren't familiar, what we're going to do is we are going to change the qualities of these keyframes. These little diamond-shaped keyframes are a very simple, like, this is the position in terms of the position property. This is the position of the ball. And as it changes over time, it's a very straightforward, like, here's point A, here's point B. We're moving the asset from point A to point B based on the center of it, the anchor point that we set, and then it moves back. So a really simple thing you can do to add a little bit more varied motion to your asset is to use the easing in and easing out. So let's go ahead and apply these and see what they do. So all you need to do is on the keyframe itself, you can control or right click on it, and you're going to see a bottom option. There's a bunch of options here, which all do different things, but the bottom option is Keyframe Assistant. Easy ease, easy in, and easy out. Easy ease out. So for the first keyframe, we're going to go ahead and ease it in. And you're going to see the shape of the keyframe changes. And this is showing us that it's going to slowly ease in the sphere's movement from point A to point B. So let's see what that looks like. Let's go ahead and play it. It doesn't really show a lot of change quite yet. But let's go ahead and go to the middle keyframe, and we're going to choose Easy Ease here. And you're going to see that there's a little bit of a difference. So with the easing in and then the easing out, this ball moves at a different speed. So let's go ahead and go to the last keyframe. And we're going to easy ease out, so you can see the shape here is pointed inward. And let's look at how that motion changes over time. So you can see that the sphere in the middle is still hitting the exact same position points, but it's just moving a little bit differently. And it's moving, one might say, a little bit more naturally in terms of living things in the world or how objects might move through space. So because it gives a little bit more lively of emotion. It makes us feel like it's a little bit more real.